The wind howled across the empty plains like a ghostly hymn, sweeping through the lonely train station of Willow Creek and rattling the tin sign that hung half loose over the ticket booth. The westbound train had departed not 10 minutes ago, its whistle still echoing faintly in the valley, leaving behind only silence, and a single woman sitting on a splintered wooden bench. Clara Bennett sat with her carpetbag clutched tight to her lap, the thin fabric of her travel dress doing little to shield her from the biting wind. Her bonnet had come loose somewhere between Dodge and here, and now her hair, light brown and tangled from the long journey, whipped around her pale face. She pressed her gloved hands together for warmth, her fingers trembling, her lips dry and cracked. She tried not to cry. The platform stretched quiet around her, lined with stacked crates, empty barrels, and the faint creak of a weather-worn telegraph pole. A few townsfolk lingered, two men leaning against the general store rail, pretending to smoke while casting glances her way, and an older woman sweeping dust off the steps of the mercantile, her eyes sharp with disapproval. They all knew what she was. A mail-order bride, a stranger from nowhere who'd sold her future on a promise written in ink. Clara lowered her head, cheeks burning. The laughter of the men cut through the wind, faint but cruel. She wished she could vanish, that the train would return and carry her away again, to anywhere that wasn't here. The letter she carried in her bag was creased and soft from being read too many times. Samuel Harlow, rancher, 35, seeking a wife to help tend home and raise a family. Must be hardworking, God-fearing, and honest. There had been no mention of love, no mention of kindness, but he had promised fairness. And in a world that had taken everything from her, a father gone to drink, a brother to war, and her job at the Kansas City laundry lost when the owner's son grew too bold, that word had sounded enough like hope. Now, sitting alone on this forgotten platform, she wasn't so sure. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd seen another woman, stronger, prettier, more suited to ranch life, and decided she wasn't worth the trouble? The thought made her stomach twist. The cold bit deeper, cutting through her bones. She rubbed her arms and looked down the empty dirt road that led toward the hills. No wagon, no rider. Nothing. She was beginning to think she'd made a terrible mistake when the faint rhythm of hooves reached her ears. Clop, clop, clop. Her head lifted sharply. Through the curtain of dust rising at the far end of town, a figure emerged on horseback. The man was tall, even from a distance, his shoulders broad beneath a long brown coat that flapped with each stride of his horse. He rode with an ease that spoke of long hours in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the wind. The animal, a chestnut mare with a white blaze down its face, moved with powerful grace, kicking up small clouds of dust as it approached. Clara's heart hammered. She tried to stand but nearly stumbled, her knees stiff from sitting so long. She brushed futilely at the dirt on her skirt, aware of how small and plain she must look. When the rider drew close, he slowed, reining in the horse with one hand. The wind caught his coat, revealing a revolver holstered at his hip and a shirt the color of faded denim. His face came into view, sun-browned and strong, the kind of face that had weathered storms and solitude. His eyes met hers. "Clara Bennett?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, like gravel and warmth together. She swallowed. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, dismounting in a single motion that stirred the dust at her feet. Samuel Harlow. She recognized the name, instantly, though she'd never heard it spoken aloud. He tied the reins loosely to the post and turned toward her. For a moment, he simply looked at her. His gaze wasn't cruel or impatient, just assessing, as if he were trying to decide if she was real, or if she'd vanish like so many other promises in this wild land. She wanted to speak, to explain that her dress was wrinkled from the train, that she hadn't meant to arrive looking so disheveled. But the words caught in her throat. The silence stretched between them until another gust of wind rushed through, cold enough to make her shiver violently. She tried to hold still, embarrassed by the way her teeth chattered, but couldn't hide it. That was when he moved. Without a word, Samuel shrugged off his heavy wool coat and stepped closer. The scent of leather, smoke, and pine reached her before he did. His hands, large, calloused, and rough, lifted the coat and settled it gently around her shoulders. The weight of it was immediate and comforting. It swallowed her small frame, the collar brushing her jaw, the warmth seeping through her chilled skin. She blinked up at him, startled. Thank you, Mr. Harlow." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You been waitin' long?" "Since the noon train," she whispered. He glanced toward the tracks, his jaw tightening slightly. "Should have been here sooner. Had a colt get loose." Spent the better part of the day tracking him down. She nodded quickly, though she hardly understood the ranch talk. She only knew that his voice carried no anger, just simple fact. You must be tired, he said after a pause. There's a long ride ahead yet. Her heart jumped. To your ranch, he gave a faint nod. That's right, home's 30 miles west, near the ridge. We'll stay in town tonight. Ride out at first light. He lifted her carpetbag easily, the muscles in his forearm flexing beneath his rolled sleeve, and gestured for her to follow. Clara hesitated, glancing around the platform one last time. The people who had been watching earlier now looked away, pretending to mind their business. A dog barked somewhere near the saloon. A tumbleweed rolled past. The loneliness she'd carried since stepping off the train eased, just slightly. As she followed him toward the wagon waiting at the end of the street, she realized something strange. This man, this silent, weathered cowboy, hadn't said more than a handful of words to her, yet somehow she felt safer than she had in months. Maybe it was the coat. Maybe it was the way he'd placed it on her shoulders without hesitation, without question. Or maybe it was simply that, for the first time since Kansas City, someone had seen her, not as a burden, or a stranger, or a problem to be fixed. Just as a woman standing in the cold. When he helped her up into the wagon, his hand steady at her elbow, she dared to look at him again. His face was unreadable, but his eyes flickered once, softly, briefly, with something that almost looked like kindness. He climbed in beside her, clicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward, the wheels creaking in rhythm with the steady sound of hooves. As the station faded behind them, Clara pressed the collar of his coat closer around her throat, the scent of it grounding her. She didn't know what waited on that faraway ranch, whether it would be a home or just another kind of loneliness, but for now, under the vast stretch of twilight sky, she allowed herself one fragile thought. The wagon creaked steadily as it rolled over the uneven prairie road, the sound of the wheels mixing with the whisper of the wind. The sun had dipped below the hills, and the first stars were beginning to appear, bright, cold diamonds scattered across the darkening sky. Clara sat wrapped in Samuel's coat, her hands buried in its warmth, her body still trembling slightly from the chill that had settled deep into her bones. Beside her, Samuel Harlow drove in silence, his hat brim low, his eyes fixed on the faint trail ahead. The reins rested loosely in his gloved hands, but his posture carried the stillness of a man used to long, quiet rides. Occasionally, he flicked a glance her way, not speaking, but making sure she hadn't dozed off or fallen ill. The air between them was awkward, not unpleasant, just uncertain, like the space between strangers who were about to become something more, though neither dared to imagine what that might be. After some time, Clara found her voice, though it came out soft and uncertain. "It's beautiful," she said, gesturing toward the horizon where the last light glowed faintly above the plains. Samuel nodded once. "Ain't much to look at in winter," he replied, his voice low. "But come spring, this whole stretch'll turn gold. Wildflowers'll bloom out by the ridge. My boy says it looks like heaven when the wind hits 'em just right." She turned to him, surprised by the mention. "You have a son." His jaw shifted slightly. "Jake, 6 years old." There was a pause. She wanted to ask about his wife, but something in his expression stopped her. The lines around his mouth were deep, not from anger, but from grief that hadn't yet faded. She'd seen it before in the faces of war widows at the boarding house, the quiet ache of someone who had learned to live with ghosts. "I didn't know," she said gently. He gave a small nod. "Didn't say in the letter. Some things ain't easy to write." The wind brushed against them, lifting strands of her hair. The silence that followed wasn't as heavy as before, it carried a strange sort of peace. As the wagon crested a small hill, Clara caught her first glimpse of the valley below. The land stretched far and wide, a patchwork of grass and shadow, dotted with the silhouettes of cattle and the faint outline of a distant homestead, a lantern flickering in the dark like a promise. "That's it," Samuel said quietly, nodding toward the light. "Harlow Ranch." She watched the glow draw nearer as they descended. Each turn of the wheel seemed to bring new sounds. The lowing of cattle, the bark of a distant dog, the rustle of the wind through the corral fence. By the time they reached the yard, the moon had risen, pale and full, bathing the land in silver. Samuel pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down, the boards of the wagon groaning beneath him. Then, without a word, he turned and offered her his hand. Clara hesitated for only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough, warm, steady. He helped her down gently, his hand lingering just long enough to make her heart stumble in her chest. The ranch house loomed before them, a wide, sturdy structure built of dark pine, with light spilling through its windows and smoke curling from the chimney. It was simple, strong, and alive in a way that made her breath catch. The front door opened suddenly, and a small figure appeared on the porch, a boy, barefoot and tousle-haired, holding a wooden toy horse. "Pa," he called sleepily. Samuel's face softened in a way Clara hadn't seen before. "It's me, Jake," he said, his voice turning warm. "Got someone with me." The boy blinked, then stepped forward, curiosity bright in his blue eyes. "Is she the lady from the letter?" Clara froze. Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, but then he nodded once. "Yeah," he said simply. "This is Miss Bennet." The boy studied her for a moment, then grinned, a quick, shy smile that reminded her of sunlight after rain. "You look nice," he said. The words caught her off guard, and before she could stop herself, she smiled back. "Thank you. Go on inside, Samuel," told the boy, patting his head. "Put another log on the fire." Jake nodded and scampered back into the house. "Come on," Samuel said, turning to her. "You'll freeze standin' out here." The door creaked open, and warmth rushed out to meet her. The scent of stew and wood smoke filled the air. Inside, the cabin was modest but homey, a stone hearth blazing at one end, a rough-hewn table set for three, and shelves lined with worn books and jars of dried herbs. She stepped across the threshold slowly, afraid to disturb the quiet harmony of it all. Samuel set her bag down beside the door, then hung his hat on a peg. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the chair near the fire. "You look half frozen." Clara obeyed, sinking into the chair as the heat began to soak into her legs. Her hands, still hidden in his coat sleeves, finally stopped trembling. Samuel moved about the kitchen in silence, ladling stew into a bowl and setting it before her. "Ain't much," he said. "But it's hot." She stared down at it, the steam curling up in gentle ribbons. Her throat tightened. "It's more than I expected," she whispered. He paused at that, meeting her eyes across the table. For the first time since the station, he smiled, small, hesitant, but real. The moment passed quickly. He turned away, stoking the fire, and Jake reappeared, dragging a blanket from his small bed in the corner. "Miss Bennet can use it, Pa," he said earnestly. Clara's eyes stung as she accepted it. "Thank you, Jake." "You're welcome," he said proudly. The three of them ate together in quiet, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft hum of wind outside. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten in a home that felt this warm, not just from heat, but from something deeper. After supper, Samuel showed her to a small room at the back of the house. The walls were plain, the bed neatly made, the window looking out toward the pasture. "You can rest here," he said. "We'll figure the rest come morning." She turned to him, suddenly unsure. "Mr. Harlow, thank you for everything." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome, ma'am." When he turned to go, she spoke again, softly. "I was afraid you wouldn't come." That made him stop. He looked back over his shoulder, his gaze steady, his voice lower than before. "I gave my word, Miss Bennet. Out here, that still means something." The door closed gently behind him, leaving her alone in the quiet. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket close, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. She could hear him moving about the house, the clink of dishes, the murmur of his son's voice, the low hum of the wind outside. It wasn't love, not yet. But there was something here, a stillness, a safety she hadn't known in years.